for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Richard Southey. I'm going to do a short introduction in just a minute, but I was asked to come here to do a class on trauma-informed care. So before we even get started, who's heard of trauma-informed care before? Good chunk of us. It's a term that's going around a lot in this work, and there's not a lot of people talking about what it actually is, besides that it sounds great and it's something we should all be doing. So this class is an opportunity really to dive into more detail on what it is, why it's important, and why we're talking about it. Oh, I turned off my clicker. This is our agenda. I was in the Army before this, and they told us always put an agenda. You don't really have to worry about this, but. So, as I said, my name is Richard Southey. Right now, I'm the Assistant Director of Programs at Central Shelter Services, which is a homeless shelter in Phoenix, Arizona, just north of us. I oversee our family shelter there, an outreach center, and then I do a lot of our data, policy, and program analysis and evaluation. I do all that because in addition to that job, I'm also a PhD candidate at Arizona State University in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. My PhD is in global health. I have a linguistics master's degree and then a bachelor's degree in linguistics and a bachelor's degree in Arabic from the University of Arizona. So I have a little bit of good in me. My research is in trauma, homelessness, and policy. Very simply, I spend a lot of time talking to people about their experiences while they're experiencing homelessness and the types of trauma they experience both before it and during it, and use that to inform how we think about policy and programming at organizations like yours. My work is really centered on one thing: how can we do a better job to serve the people that, and for most of us, will be at their most vulnerable parts of their life. In addition to this, I mentioned I'm a veteran. I have 2 dogs, 2 cats, all sorts of interesting things about me, right? So, before we get started, I really just want to talk about what the point of all this is, right? I really want everyone to be able to walk away with this, at a minimum, with an understanding of the role trauma plays in the work that we do. If you can understand the role trauma has and how it impacts the work that we're doing, it will radically change how you think about this work. All of the learning and schooling that I've done has taught me one thing, and that trauma is ever present in the stuff that we are doing, and it impacts virtually every interaction we have with our clients. And if you can understand that, it really helps you rethink how you're thinking about this work. And then hopefully, I aim to help build the skills necessary to be able to operationalize that understanding in your day-to-day. If you understand it better, what can you actually do to use the knowledge that you're being provided with? And that's really what we're hoping to walk away with. But I want to acknowledge also that talking about trauma can be re-traumatizing for some people. It's going to get heavy at some points during this. And so at any point you feel like this is a lot, feel free to zone out. If you need to step out of the room, there's no one going to stop you. I had an undergrad once ask me to use the bathroom in the middle of class, and I was like, we don't do that in college. You're an adult, you can just go. No one's holding you prisoner here, right? So if at any point you're like, this is a lot, I need a breather, I need to step out, I don't want to be listening to this right now, don't feel like you have to stay. I'm not going to take it personally if you need a moment, right? In addition to that, I tell all my undergrads and anyone that I teach a class with, the PowerPoint is an assistive tool. If you can't see it because you're on this side of the room, it's not the end of the world. Anything that's on this screen, I'm going to say in one way or another. So this is really to help keep me on point. And then if you kind of lose me in everything I'm saying, the summaries will be on the screen. But if you can't see it, if you can't follow the screen and me, I'd much rather you listen to me because I have a lovely voice. So, any questions before we get into this? And as always, feel free to ask questions at any point. So, a psychic injury, especially one caused by emotional shock, the memory of which is repressed and remains unhealed. An internal injury, especially to the brain, which may result in a behavioral disorder of organic origin. Also the state or condition so caused. That's the dictionary definition of trauma, which is a whole bunch of nothing. I couldn't do anything with this. But Sigmund Freud, if anyone has heard of him, was the father of modern psychoanalysis and said a lot of controversial things. But one of the good things he said was that trauma is an experience defined by helplessness on the part of the ego. If you can think of anything that you consider to be traumatic and you really drill into it, what's really happening is that there's no control, you're helpless, you're not able to act and stop whatever is causing the distress in this moment. And so when we're thinking about trauma, and when we're talking about trauma, this is really what trauma is, right? It's helplessness. It's this inability to control or act and keep yourself safe. So as we're going through this class, if I say something, like, I don't really know if that's traumatic, just ask yourself, could someone feel helpless if they were experiencing this? And if the answer is yes, then someone could find this to be traumatic. Which leads to the next point, which is that trauma is culturally, individually, historically defined. What I find to be traumatic might not be traumatic to you, and something you might find traumatic might not be traumatic to me. I had a friend in high school who, his whole family, we lived in Sierra Vista, and there's all these country roads out there, and I had a friend who, his whole family was really into motocross and BMX bikes, and he used to do all this stuff, right? And our senior year, he got into this really bad accident. He was out in the middle of the night, the bike flipped on top of him, he couldn't get it off of him, he was stuck there for like 6 hours until his family found him. He ended up in the hospital. They had to put him into a medically induced coma at one point, and he was in the hospital for like 6 months. He gets out, he comes back to school, and he's in a wheelchair, and we're talking and we're asking him, like, what are you gonna do? And he goes, I really just wanna get out of this wheelchair so I can get back on the bike. And I was like, this dude is crazy. And what I've learned since is he had this history and family culture and all this experience riding these bikes, and getting into a life-altering accident did not traumatize him because he had the skills in his brain to process this experience. If that happened to me, I probably would never get in a car again. I'd stay in my house. You wouldn't catch me near anything with a motor. This guy shook it off like it was nothing. And so when we're thinking about trauma, it's really important to understand, just because something doesn't seem traumatic to you, doesn't mean it isn't traumatic to someone else. What we have learned in the research that I do and the people that I work with and all sorts of people that are much smarter than me, what we've learned is that there's actually a very specific cascade of events that happen in our body when we experience something traumatic. And these events are not something that are unique to people. We see them in all sorts of animals as well. And this is something that's really just ingrained in us from a biological perspective. It's not something we can control. It's not something we have a choice over. It's something that just happens as a survival mechanism. And this mechanism has lifelong implications. When these things happen to us, when we experience something traumatic, we actually see the physical evidence that this is something that's going to impact us potentially forever. And so if you can recognize that a physical injury could have a lifelong implication on a person's well-being, then you also have to recognize that trauma could have a lifelong implication on someone's well-being. If getting a heart surgery when you're 6 years old might impact your ability to run a marathon 20 years down the road, experience something highly traumatic as a child could impact many of your experiences once you reach adulthood as well. And so that's something I really want everyone to understand, and we're going to talk about why this is the case. And that's because we as people have one core function, one core thing that all of us want to do, and that's survive. We have a biological imperative for surviving. Our brains exist for one purpose, and that's to keep us alive. If you were locked in a room and they started pumping poisonous gas into it and they said, you hold your best breath for 3 minutes, we'll suck it all out and we'll give you $10 billion, all you have to do is hold your breath for 3 minutes. You could sit there in that room and you could hold your breath, and unless you're a really good swimmer, probably at about 1.5 minutes, you're gonna be struggling. And you're gonna be trying to tell yourself, billions of dollars are 1.5 minutes away. And you're gonna get 2 minutes, maybe you'll get to 2:15, and then without any control, you're going to breathe. Your diaphragm is gonna contract, your brain is going to tell you, you have to breathe. And regardless of all the circumstances around it, your brain is thinking about your survival, and it thinks you're not getting enough air and you need to breathe, despite the fact that there's poison in the air all around you, right? Because your brain has been conditioned for millions and millions of years that it has a part of it whose sole purpose is to make sure you are breathing constantly. Every single one of you are breathing right now without thinking about it, except now I said something, so you're all gonna be thinking about it, right? But every single one of us are breathing, we're blinking, we're doing all of these involuntary functions. We're doing it because our brain needs us to do these things to stay alive. And there's nothing you can do to stop these in 99.999% of the time. Our response to trauma is very similar. It is there to keep us alive. And what it does is designed for when we were living in caves and hunting saber-toothed tigers and all sorts of things and doing basic survival, and the world around us has changed in a lot of ways. Our brains have not. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how the process that our brains use for trauma and the process our brains use for survival is often incompatible with the larger world that we live in, and how this impacts us, our clients, and the work that we do. So, was anyone expecting a biology class today? There are 4 parts of our brain that are relevant to this. The first is the prefrontal cortex, and that's the top of your brain, the front of it. And that's you. That's executive thought, logical thinking, decision making. You're all sitting here right now and you're thinking, man, this guy's got a really nice shirt on. You're thinking about what you're gonna have for dinner tonight. You're thinking about all sorts of things, right? And that's you. That's your prefrontal cortex operating. And this is really like who you are as a person. And then there's your thalamus, and this is really in the middle of your brain. And that's the part of your brain that processes sensory information. You guys are hearing my voice, it's going in your ears, it's getting processed, and it hits the thalamus, and your thalamus decides what to do with that sound. You guys are seeing the screen, or you're seeing me, you're feeling the chair on your legs, you're maybe a little bit warm because there's a bunch of people in this room, right? All of these feelings are going to your thalamus and being processed. Then there's your amygdala, and your amygdala is this little walnut-sized part of your brain right at the base, and it has 2 functions, memory formation and emotions. And a part of the emotions is the fight or flight response. And your amygdala processes all the information that comes in the thalamus, decides what to keep, what to get rid of, what to remember, what to forget, and it really decides how you feel about all this stuff in concert with your prefrontal cortex. And then there's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. That's the only time I'm going to say that. It's the HPA axis, and it's responsible for triggering the hormone response. It's this pathway that moves all the way through your brain, and when it gets activated, your brain releases all these hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline. And the purpose of this is when your fight or flight response is activated, this is the part of your brain that actually activates it and tells your brain and your body, fight or flight. That was a lot. Any questions about that? So all of this is relevant because we're going to do a little exercise. We're going to talk about 2 days, and we're going to talk about going to the park and a trip to the park. And as we're going to this park, I'm going to walk you guys through what's happening in your brain as you experience this day at the park. So this is our first trip. It's a gorgeous Tucson morning, not in the middle of July. And you're deciding you're going to take your kid to the park. You pick up kiddo, you get them in the back seat of the car, you strap them in, you hand them a tablet because you want to listen to them talk the whole car ride. And you hop in the front seat and off you go. You turn on the radio and there's a new Billie Eilish song on. You're driving and you can feel the sun through your windshield on your hands on the steering wheel. You have the AC on. You're driving 65 and a 60 because it's Arizona and everyone speeds. There's a sound of the tablet coming from your kid in the back seat. It's a nice morning, so you've cracked the window and the wind is flowing through your hair. You look to your left and there's a white sedan, and you look to your right and there's a red SUV. And as you're driving, the white sedan starts moving into your lane, and you catch it just in your peripheries. So you slam on the brakes, you grip the steering wheel, and you rip it in the other direction. And you don't even think about doing this. You have years and years of excellent driving record, and you're a defensive driver, and you know what to do without even thinking about it. And so you just do it. And then, not quite. Good idea though. Then the information hits your prefrontal cortex and you go, there's a red car on the other side. And so you correct. Your prefrontal cortex says, we can't swerve that way, we're gonna get in an accident. You correct. You do all your defensive driving so you don't overcorrect. You stay in your lane. If you're an angry driver like me, maybe you say some things your kids shouldn't hear. But you make it to the park. So next weekend, you decide you're gonna do it all again. You're gonna go to the park again. And you're driving. All the conditions are very similar. You're kind of sick of hearing this new song on the radio at this point, and you've more or less forgotten about what happened last weekend. Maybe you see a car and it reminds you for a moment that you almost got in an accident last weekend, but it's a blip on the radar and you don't even think about it. You just move on. And that was just a normal day. So let's go back and do this again. Everything's the same, right? Kids in the back seat, tablets playing, there's music coming out of the radio, you're 65 and a 60, I always get these mixed up. There's a white car to your left and a red car to your right. And this time, the car swerves in your direction, you slam on the brakes, you grip the steering wheel, but this time the signal to your prefrontal cortex to correct takes a tiny bit of a second long. And before you can correct, you hit the other car. You go flying off the side of the road because they go in one direction and you go in the other. You go into the side where there's those little divots in the road, right? And you hit and your car stops moving. And there's smoke coming out of the front of the car. The baby's in the backseat crying. The horn is on because every time there's an accident like this, the horn comes on and won't turn off for some reason. You hear people shouting in a different distance. You can smell the smoke up your nose. The seatbelt is really tight against your chest. And then eventually you hear an ambulance siren. And you're sitting there and you're stuck. And you're pulling on the seatbelt. And you're trying to get out. You're trying to reassure your kid. And in the same moment, you're checking your body and your brain, right? You're going through, I can feel my feet, I can feel my hands, I'm okay. All while trying to get control. But you're stuck. And you're pulling, you're trying to get out, and you can't. Eventually the ambulance gets there. You have a little brief wait in the hospital, and everyone checks out, and everyone is okay, thankfully. A few weeks later, you decide, you know what, I'm ready to get back in the car. I'm gonna take a drive. You do the same thing, you're gonna go to the park. This time, you do most of the same stuff, but as you're pulling out of your driveway, you decide, you know what, I'm gonna take the side streets. You don't really think about it, it's just this decision you make. Oh, I'm gonna avoid the highway. You hear the tablet in the back seat of the car, and this time the volume on the tablet seems really loud, like louder than you've ever heard it before, and it's in your ears, and it's really starting to stress you out, and you start to feel your heart beating a little bit faster. And then you're driving, and you press your foot against the gas, and suddenly your breathing starts to feel a little shallow. And you're starting to get really anxious. And you're like, I'm okay, I'm fine, we're okay, we're good. And then you're pulling up to a stop sign, and as you're pulling up, a car races right by you and blows through the stop sign and goes straight through it. And all of a sudden, there are alarms going off in your head, and you're panicking. You are freaking out, you start hyperventilating, your hands start to feel really numb, your face starts to feel really flushed and tense, your heart is racing, you're breathing really hard, and you have to pull over and you have to stop. And you're doing your best not to panic, but you're panicking. And you can't figure out why. You're telling yourself, I'm safe, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm okay. But everything in your body is telling you right now that you're in danger. And it takes 5 minutes, maybe it takes 10 minutes, maybe it takes 15 minutes. But eventually, while you're sitting there on the side of the road, you calm down and you remind yourself you're safe. But that entire time, there's something in the back of your head telling you, I'm in danger. And you just don't know what. That is trauma. So what happened there? Well, when you were in the accident the first time, and actually I'll go back, and you were stuck in that car seat, or in the front seat, assuming you're not in a car seat. When you're stuck in that front seat, you're stuck. And when you're stuck, your amygdala is going, we need to remember this. This is not a cool vibe. I'm not liking this. I need to remember what happened here so that I can make sure it never happens again. And a million years ago when we were living in caves, remembering little things was really important. The sound of a tiger moving through the grass is really important to remember so that you don't get jumped by a tiger. But in our world, we're in cars all the time. We're driving down the road all the time. We're moving through these cities all the time. And so when you're sitting in this car, your amygdala is going, we gotta write all this down. Mm-hmm. And so it starts making these memories. But the process your amygdala uses to write memories does not play well with two chemicals. And I mentioned them earlier. Does anyone remember what they were? Adrenaline and cortisol. Mm-hmm. And when these mix in with the process that your brain uses to make memories, the process to make memories actually breaks apart. And instead of complete memories going into your brain, you get little fragments. So you get to remember the sound of the horn blaring and all that fear that you were feeling in that moment. The sound of the tablet in the back seat and the fear you were feeling in that moment. Every single little piece gets broken up and sent off into your brain, and attached to each piece of sensory information is that fear. Because your brain is going, I need to remember all of these little signals so that if I run into them again, I can get on alert because I'm in danger. These were the signs that something bad was about to happen. And so the next time you're doing it, I went the wrong way. The next time you're doing it, you're getting these signals, but they're not quite the same. You're in the car, you're safe, you know you are safe. Your prefrontal cortex is telling you, we're good. But the rest of your brain has decided, no, we're not good. And if you're not gonna do what you need to do to keep us safe, you don't get a choice, I'm gonna make you. And it starts setting off all these alarms and telling you you're in danger to try and force you to get out of the situation. We've all heard the word trigger because it's become very politicized, but this is what it means to get triggered. One of those little fragments in your brain gets activated and your brain decides there's danger in the corner. And then another one gets activated and goes, there's danger right there. And then another one gets activated and says, you're in danger right now, get out. And your fight or flight response activates. Trauma, prolonged stress, traumatic stress, all of these things can initiate this process. And I don't even have to say it, but I will. Homelessness is traumatic. Every single one of our clients, whether they are homeless, whether they are imminently homeless, if they are living in absurd amount of poverty, and they're having access our programs in order to get assistance, they are actively enduring trauma. And this process is happening in their brains. Every single one of your clients, or virtually every single one of your clients, will have experienced something like this, or maybe even this exact scenario. When we're thinking about trauma, we really have to understand that this is what our clients are enduring. These little triggers are going off in their brains all the time. Anytime they interact with us, anytime they're moving through these doors, there's little things that are triggering them and reminding them of danger at some point or another. And it can be incredibly mundane things. I used to have candles in my office, and I had a client whose house burned down, and she had a real issue with fire. And just lighting a candle in my office was triggering for her. And anytime she came into my office, if the candles were lit, she would be incredibly tense. She wouldn't really talk to me. She seemed like she was trying to get out of the office as quick as possible. And it took 5 or 6 meetings for it to come out that the reason she was homeless was because her house got burned down, because she was a hoarder and a fire starter. And that was when it clicked in my head, oh, maybe these candles aren't helping because you're staring at them the whole time you're meeting with me and you're barely talking to me. Little things like that most of us probably don't even think about, can radically alter how our clients interact with us. And they can radically alter how we interact with each other. Little things that we're not thinking about that impact how we're communicating with each other, how we're interacting with each other on a daily basis. So earlier I said that trauma is just as real as a physical injury. And this is how we know. When we're looking at people who've endured large amounts of trauma, or even small amounts of trauma, we see certain things ever present. We see them consistently across different populations of people, all who hold this trauma in their background. Physical costs are things like insomnia, memory and concentration impairment. Think about if your brain is constantly looking out for danger and constantly being told it's in danger, how could you possibly sleep at night? How could you possibly be comfortable in your home? How could you possibly focus on anything if your brain is constantly on alert for danger? Heart disease, high blood pressure. Imagine your heart is always beating at 120 beats per minute. It's constantly racing. You can't get through a day without feeling a little anxious. course you're gonna get heart disease. Serotonin and dopamine fatigue is when your brain is consistently using so much serotonin and dopamine, which are the chemicals that make us feel happy, that they stop working. The receptors start to die off, and you stop feeling as great. How many of our clients have experienced that? It doesn't matter what you do, how kind or friendly you are, they just don't seem to ever be in a good mood. And this is one I always like to emphasize, decreased brain weight. If you're enduring trauma too much, your brain will start pulling away nutrients and resources from your prefrontal cortex because the rest of your brain has decided that you're making bad decisions and you shouldn't be in control anymore. Your ability to make rational and logical decisions actually becomes depleted. And your brain starts to weigh less because it is moving away nutrients and density from one of the most important parts of the brain, because it doesn't trust you. And I don't know about your clients, but the vast majority of my clients had no control over the fact that they were becoming homeless. There was nothing they could have done that could have prevented it. They're homeless because of external forces like the rental market, which is impacting not only all our clients, but all of us. And they're homeless now, and they're enduring all this, and their brain is going, you made some bad decisions, and you're sitting there like, you didn't do anything wrong. This is just reality. Your brain can actually get smaller from constant exposure to trauma. And then there's the mental cost. Hypervigilance, actually, I'll just have you raise your hand if you've ever dealt with a client that has presented with any of these. So hypervigilance, does everyone know what that is? Just someone who's on guard all the time, constantly looking out. They're never really meeting your eyes because they're looking out the doors and out the windows and never really focusing, right? Show of hands. Aggressive behavior, I should see everyone's hand for that one. Submissive behavior. Hypersexual behavior. Risk-taking behaviors. Suicidality. Chronic fatigue. Emotional depression. And avoidant behaviors. These are all responses to trauma.
It can be considered defense mechanisms.
Absolutely, and we're gonna get into that actually. You're ahead of the game. You're good at this. And these can be caused by different things, but when you're looking at a highly traumatized population, very often the reason we see these behaviors is as a response to trauma. These behaviors that we deal with all the time, that we are constantly navigating and figuring out what am I gonna do about this, is not a client acting out, it's not a client being a bad person, it's not a client intentionally being difficult. More often than not, this is a response to trauma. This is their brain going, this is how I survive. Because think about if you're a kid in high school that gets bullied all the time, and then you start fighting back. You start getting angry, you shout and curse and you say all these things and you get really mean and everyone stops bullying you. That conditions your brain to understand, hey, if I'm aggressive, I stay safe, I'm okay. And so the next time your brain senses danger, even if it's not a high school bully, the next time it goes, getting angry really worked. And so you get angry. And I know we have all dealt with clients who you are kind, you are nice, you're patient, it doesn't matter what you do, they just get mad at you. It's very likely a response due to trauma. So, I gave everyone a little sheet. This is the Emotional Regulation Skills Questionnaire. And before I explain this, I'm going to say, I'm not a clinician, this is not a diagnostic tool. So do not take any of this to mean anything about any of you. This is an exercise I like to do because it is a helpful way to think about everything we just talked about. When we go through this process that we just talked about, really what's happening is you're becoming dysregulated. Your amygdala has decided you're in danger and is dysregulating your system on purpose to shock you into doing what you need to do to survive. And it's doing often things that are inconducive to a productive outcome, but that's how it works. Deers freeze when they see bright lights because they perceive them as danger, and they think, if I just stop what I'm doing and don't move, whatever is shining lights on me will go away and I'll be okay. Except more often than not, right, this is a car moving at 60 miles per hour and deers weigh 400 pounds and they collide and the deer hops away fine and your car's still whole. Emotional regulation skills are the things we do to move us back from dysregulation into regulation. This is a way of us telling our brains, no, we're okay, we're safe, and we're gonna be all right. And so there are a whole slew of skills, but this one assesses you specifically for 7 or 9? 9 skills. And so we're gonna talk through what they are real quick. You are welcome at any point to share, but again, this is not a diagnostic tool and I'm not a clinician. This does not say anything about who you are as a person. And I will say, no one scores perfect on this. Everyone has some deficit somewhere, and not to take this as an indication of anything, okay? So, the first one are questions 1, 12, and 19, and you're just gonna add those 3 scores together. And then at the bottom, there's a little table that you can write your totals in if you want to help remembering it. 1, 12, and 19. And you just add those 3 numbers together, what you answered. Yep. And that one is AW, awareness. So this one is assessing your ability to simply know you're feeling an emotion. It's not necessarily which emotion it is or why you're feeling it, just that you are feeling emotions in this moment. And this skill is really helpful because a lot of people will be feeling things and they don't realize they are. You're angry and you're not able to place that it's anger until you have someone to lash out at. And so awareness, being able to say, oh, these are feelings in my chest, this is what I'm feeling, is a really helpful skill because it allows you to name what's going on. You don't have to necessarily do anything about it, but it helps you know, oh, there's something actually happening here. The next one is 7, 14, and 24. And the most you can get is 12, so if you're scoring like 15 or something, you'll get something wrong.
You said at 24?
7, 14, and 24. So this one is sensations. When these things happen, we get markers in our body. We get physical sensations that tell us you're feeling something. When I was walking through that car accident, how many of you felt your face tighten up a little? You felt yourself getting a little stressed out. You could feel the anxiety I was describing in your body. This is sensations. And again, being able to place sensations, the feelings that you're having in your body when this is happening, is a really helpful regulation skill because it allows you to go, oh, I'm feeling this way because I'm anxious. I'm feeling this way because I'm angry. I'm feeling this way because I'm upset. When I get really anxious, my face flushes. I feel like I have like needles in my cheek. And this tells me like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. But imagine if you couldn't do that. If you couldn't attach the physical sensation to the emotion you were feeling. And out of nowhere, your face starts to feel really tense. Your heart starts to beat a bunch. And you don't know why you're feeling this, but you're feeling this. And then someone goes up to you and goes, hey, if you don't get out of here, you're not gonna be able to come back tonight. You have to be out by this time. Are you gonna react rationally? No, you're already feeling a bunch of feelings that you can't place, and now someone has gotten it in your face. And so this is why sensations is a really helpful regulation skill. If you can place the sensations to emotions, you're able to process it. Yes, ma'am.
What was this sensations? The first group was what was the
Awareness.
Awareness. Okay, thank you.
So the next one is 6, 13, and 25.
So you're saying that if somebody hyperreacts to a suggestion or something like you have couch what they're feeling.
It certainly could be, yes. It's hard to know from external cues, but if someone is feeling something and they don't know what it is, and then someone comes and agitates them, they're more likely to lash out at whatever agitated them than they are to go, I'm feeling really anxious and angry right now, because they can't place the feelings in their body to the emotion that they're having. Does that make sense?
100%.
So the next one, did anyone score really well on this and wants to raise their hand? Really well, like high, they had a high score, close to 12. This is my worst one, which is why I asked 10, okay.
On the CL?
Yeah. This one is clarity, and this is my worst skill, which is why I asked, because I'm really bad at it. This is knowing fully what the feeling is. So you have clarity to this feeling that you're having. A lot of times I start getting anxious out of nowhere, or I start getting upset about something, and I can feel it, and I know it's happening, but I really couldn't tell you, like, am I angry? Am I upset? And this is why, like, I cry when I'm arguing with people, because I just have a lot of emotions and I don't know what they are, and so, like, my brain just panics. And so, again, this skill is very helpful because it allows you to go, oh, I'm feeling something, and I'm very clear on what this feeling is. And if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm gonna say, like, being able to do this helps you process it, it helps you understand what's going on. You're less likely to lash out if you're able to say, oh, I don't know what's going on, but I'm feeling really angry right now, and so I don't want you to get in my bubble because I don't know how I'm gonna respond. The next one is 3, 11, and 20. And this one is acceptance, or I'm sorry, understanding. Yep, so it should be UN.
What was the, you said the UN?
Yep, 3, 11, and 20. And so this one is understanding. And this is understanding how your emotions actually influence you. If someone goes, we hear this all the time, like, I haven't had my morning coffee yet, so I'm a bit angsty, I'm a little angry, don't talk to me until I have my coffee. This is understanding, right? You know this is an emotion that you feel is anger, and the reason you're feeling it is that you haven't had your coffee, and you're going to feel this until you have your coffee, and this is how you're gonna respond if someone messes with you until you've had your coffee, right? This is understanding. And this is one of the skills that I think is probably one of the most important for anyone to work on, is being able to go, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I need you to give me my bubble and give me a moment, because when I get anxious, I tend to shout at people, or I tend to get physically violent because I don't know how to process this. It's not necessarily controlling the response, but going, I understand what happens to me when I'm feeling this way, and I need help to make sure I don't respond in a way that is not congruent with this environment. So the next one is 5, 17, and 23.
5, 17, and 23.
Yep. And this one is acceptance. And acceptance is accepting emotions when the situation demands it. This is gonna make me really stressed out. I know it's going to, and I just have to accept, like, this is gonna stress me out a little bit. Maybe it's not dealing with it, that's a different skill. But just knowing, like, this is a situation that's gonna do this, is gonna elicit this response, and I have to be ready because it's gonna happen, right? And this is really important because, again, it allows you to communicate to people around you, like, this is what's going on with me, this is how I'm feeling the way I am.
Last category was understanding? Okay.
The next one is 4, 18, and 26.
40,
26. And this one is tolerance. This is resilience or tolerance of negative emotions that cannot be changed. So this is saying, I'm anxious, I know I'm anxious, this situation makes me anxious, and I just have to sit here and be anxious, and it's not gonna cause me to implode. I'm not gonna break down. I'm feeling this anxiety, I'm gonna sit here with anxiety, and I know I'm feeling it, but I'm okay. And being able to tolerate negative emotions is really important. It's a really powerful skill to have. And it's one that takes a lot of learning to be able to do. Not a lot of people can tolerate negative emotions. We're not meant to tolerate negative emotions, right? Negative emotions, as we were just talking about, is our body's way of telling us there's danger here. And a lot of the times you have to be able to say, I know I'm feeling this way, but the danger's not actually there. I'm gonna be okay, and I can feel this, and I can sit in it, and I'll be okay even if I can't end it. And we're building up to something if you guys haven't caught on yet. The next one is 9, 15, and 27. And this one is self-support. So I'm gonna volunteer you guys to embarrass yourselves. Was anyone a thumb sucker like into teenage years? My best friend was. She used to suck her thumb forever. That's self-support, right? As small children, we give them binkies, and when you take the binky away, they want something to suck on it, so they start sucking on their thumb.
Pacifier.
A pacifier, thank you. And until they get a pacifier back, they're gonna suck in their thumb. And they learn this is self-soothing, right? And so, when they get distressed as a toddler, into a young child, into a teenager, that skill, that self-soothing of sucking your thumb works. And this is self-support. And no one raised their hand, so either someone's lying or no one sucks their thumb. But we all, many of us, will use skills to support ourselves when we are feeling anxious, when we're feeling distressed, when we're feeling uncomfortable. And this skill is your ability to go, I'm feeling really anxious, I'm feeling really angry, I'm feeling really uncomfortable, but this is what I need to make myself feel better. And you guys have been listening to me talk for almost an hour now, so you haven't been able to tell. I'm a self-supporter through talking. I talk myself through problems I'm facing. And this is how I do self-support. I go, I'm feeling this way because of blah, blah, blah. And really, if I do X, Y, or Z, I'll start to feel better. And it's gonna be over in an hour, and I'm not gonna be in front of all these people anymore, and I won't be anxious, and all this stuff, right? And this is self-support. And this is a skill many people use. And it's a really helpful skill to have, especially when you're working in an environment that's constantly stressing you out.
So when I see someone who's finding everything else or pacing, and I'm thinking it's nervousness, it could be self-support.
It's self-support for the nervousness, right? They're
Oh,
feeling
okay,
nervous.
right,
And so
right.
this is something that soothes that nervousness. It's not always the case, right? But many times this is a habit they picked up because it helps soothe these anxious feelings, this anger, distress, whatever it may be. So next one is 8, 15, and 22.
15 again?
Sorry, it should be, I'm gonna have to redo my math. 16, yes. 8, 16, and 22.
Oh, that changes everything. Can you say that one more time?
8, 16, and 22. This one is readiness to confront. This is confronting rather than avoiding emotionally problematic situations to reach valued goals.
So confronting?
Confronting.
What's the number you could have got?
12. So this is your ability to go, I'm feeling really upset right now, I'm feeling really distressed, doing this scares or distresses me, but I'm gonna do it anyways. I have the ability to do it anyways. For those of us who are afraid of the dark, and you have to walk down your long, scary hallway at night either way, this is readiness to confront. You know this distresses you, you know this upsets you, but you do it anyways, because you have to.
I got a high number on that one.
It's a great skill to have. And this means, look, I'm feeling this way, I know I am, but what has to happen, and I have to get this done, so I'm gonna do it, regardless of how it makes me feel. And the last one, 2, 10, and 21. And this one is modification. This is the regulation and modification of negative feelings. So this is going, I'm really angry until I have my coffee in the morning. I'm gonna have coffee first thing in the morning so I don't show up to work immediately. Knowing that there's something you can do to turn a negative emotion into a not negative one, to address the distress you're feeling. And this is done through a readiness to confront, through self-support, through tolerance, through acceptance, understanding, clarity, and all the other skills, right? This is your ability to go, I'm feeling this way, I'm going to fix it. And so we talked about all this, not as a learning experience for ourselves, though it is, right? But I want you guys to now think about our clients. All the people we work with who are actively enduring traumatic stress, who are actively enduring one of the worst things that you can experience, right? Imagine how difficult it is to actively be going through this and not only having to employ these skills, but for the vast majority of our clients, having to learn them. I'm not good at most of this stuff, believe it or not. I know I'm like getting a PhD in it and I'm still bad at it. Most people are not very good at regulating their emotions because we don't teach people how to regulate their emotions until they're well into adulthood. And at that point, all the negative things that we do to take care of ourselves have already really ingrained themselves. But these skills are really important. These skills help us navigate everything that we're experiencing, all the stress that we're enduring, right? And so the reason I do this exercise is to get you guys to think about the clients and to think about each other. How difficult must it be for our clients to use these skills? And how difficult must it be for us to use these skills with people who don't use them? It is so easy to get dysregulated when there is someone in front of you who is dysregulated. When someone is shouting at you, who's calling you names, or worse, who's throwing things at you, who could potentially be violent, who's not doing the bare minimum and you're just trying to do your job. All of these things are often a product of dysregulation. And I'm speaking from firsthand experience. It is incredibly frustrating, it can be traumatizing, and it dysregulates you. And so, again, the reason I do this exercise is to encourage everyone to think about, like, am I using these skills in my day-to-day? Are the people I'm working with using these skills day-to-day? Are the clients using these skills day-to-day? Because more likely than not, the answer is no to most of these. And then it's figuring out, how do we use these in our day-to-day? Which leads us to trauma-informed care. I did that so good, right? So before we move on, again, that was a lot. Are there any questions? So, a good chunk of you raised your hands when I asked if you heard of trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care are evidence-based practices in human services that recognize the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role trauma may play in an individual's life, including service staff. So everything we talked about the first hour, are you guys all convinced, you're all believers now that trauma is like everywhere in our work, that the stuff that we just talked about is incredibly present in everyone you work with, or most of the people you work with? I've won you all over, right? Trauma-informed care is this philosophy that developed in human services that's evidence-based, which means that people did actual research and found tangible things that we could actually measure that changed when you started implementing this philosophy. It really consists of 6 pillars, and it's really just a lens to approach the work with. It's not a specific thing you do, it's not a specific way, it's not therapy, it's not anything. It is just a philosophy and a way of approaching the work that looks different for everyone and for every organization. And really, it's about understanding where our clients come from and where the behaviors that they engage in come from and how they could be protected. With this understanding of trauma that we discussed, could you think about how the behaviors you're seeing from your clients could actually be a mechanism to make their brains think that they're creating safety for themselves? And we're gonna talk about that a little bit more later. In trauma-informed care, our client's trauma is not something we have to work around. It's not a barrier, but it is actually a way of understanding our clients. It is so incredibly helpful to know someone's trauma when you're working with them, or at least understand why the behaviors they're engaging in come from trauma, because it radically alters how you're thinking about the work that you're doing. I had a client who did not engage with me because I had candles lit in my office. I got her housed in 2 months, which doesn't sound like very fast, but it is, I promise. I got her housed in 2 months once I got rid of the candles and she started meeting with me every week. Small things can make the work easier, because if you can understand these things, it becomes easier to engage with the clients. It becomes easier to work with them. I did not get there because I got through the barrier of her having her home burned down because she was a hoarder, right? I got through it because I understood that this was a barrier that existed, and I modified my approach to better understand how I worked with her, knowing that this was a traumatic background she had. So, I mentioned there are 6 pillars. Before we get into them, I'm just gonna say I don't even have them memorized because I don't have a strong feeling about like fully understanding all 6 pillars. I'm gonna wrap them all up at the end, but I like to go through them so that everyone gets a sense of them. But you don't have to master these, you don't have to have them memorized and be able to intuit them. We're gonna get into it later, right? So the first pillar is trustworthiness and transparency. And the ideas of trustworthiness and transparency are fundamental to being trauma-informed, as it creates a baseline of understanding. If you are someone who is constantly on guard for danger, and you can't trust the person sitting on the other side of the desk, how could you possibly come out of that space where you're not feeling like you're in danger? If you can't trust the people around you, you can't feel safe. You ever had a friend who was cheating on their boyfriend or something, and every time you go out with them, you're like, I wonder if my partner's gonna see me hanging with this person, is gonna think I'm cheating or something, right? Like, that not having that trust immediately makes you feel anxious. And so it's really important that our clients are able to feel that trust and transparency, but also our staff. So trust and transparency should exist between the organization and its staff, between the organization and its clients, and between the staff and the clients. The staff should be able to trust that your organization is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that the leaders are looking out for their best interests. And you do that by doing it consistently and communicating transparently. And when I did this training at CAS, my HR director goes, so what if I'm doing layoffs in 2 weeks? Should I tell my staff that layoffs are coming? Or should I wait until the day layoffs are there and then let them know? I go, well, if you want to be transparent, you should let them know 2 weeks in advance. How many of us would appreciate a 2-week advance on getting laid off?
Or 2 weeks notice.
And so what I countered was very simple. If you have a culture of trustworthiness and transparency, and you go to your staff and you say, hey, layoffs are coming in 2 weeks, and just a record, you guys are not getting laid off, at least as far as I'm aware. So before anyone, this is just an example. If you had a culture of trustworthiness and transparency, and you tell your staff, oh, layoffs are coming in 2 weeks, what should happen is they go, thanks for letting me know, and they're gonna start looking for a job, but they're gonna continue to do the work. Because they're trusting that you're gonna have a nice severance package coming for them, that you're doing everything you can to try and keep their jobs, and maybe in a week, layoffs aren't gonna have to come. But if you wait until that last day and you tell them that, because you wanna make sure everyone sticks around, odds are you're gonna have a bunch of angry people who are destroying stuff on their way out. You're gonna have people going out in the community and saying, oh, this organization did this, they're such a bad organization, blah, 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 right? That trustworthiness, transparency insulates organizations, that creates a culture of trust. And it allows your staff to be able to work and go, I trust that the work that I'm doing is gonna benefit, and is gonna work, and is going towards whatever I'm trying to accomplish. And the same trust needs to exist between an organization and its clients. The clients have to be able to trust that this organization exists to do the mission that they're being told it's here for. And that happens by consistently doing it. And that can only be consistently done if the staff and the clients have trust between each other. And I'll be honest, one of my worst habits, because I recently, well not recently, but when I moved into an administrative role, before I was a case manager, and I was like, anytime anyone needed help, I would help them. Now I've got a bunch of additional responsibilities. I'll be walking through the shelter and someone will stop me and go, do you work here? I'm like, yeah, I work here, what can I do for you? They'll ask me for something and I go, I gotta finish what I'm doing, give me 5 minutes, I'll come back and I'll help you out. I get to where I was going, I get caught up in a conversation, 20 minutes pass, I go back to my office, and then 3 days later I go, I told someone I was gonna go back to them. And I didn't, and I forgot. And for me, that happens once, and that client, I go, oh, he'll be fine, right? But I do that once, one of my managers does that once, 2 of my staff members do that once, someone from a partner organization does that once, and the client has now, even though I only experienced one, the client's experienced 6 times, 10 times, 20 times, and that trust gets eroded. Trustworthiness and transparency is when you say you're gonna do something, you do it, but also, if someone asks you to do something and you can't do it, you just say, I can't help right now, let me get so-and-so, and they're gonna help. Without it being filled in all 3 dimensions, it's very difficult to maintain and carry this pillar throughout the organization. I could have all the trustworthiness and transparency between me and my clients, but if it doesn't exist between me and my staff aren't gonna be able to do their job right. The next one is safety. And this is not just about the physical sense of safety, but also the psychological sense of safety. Has anyone ever been in a room and you're like, I'm fine, this is completely safe, there's no one with anything in here, but there's something in the back of your head telling you like, this, I'm not safe, like there's something going on. For the women in the room, when you're the only woman in a room full of men, right? Safety is not just about, is your body physically safe? It is about, am I feeling safe? Is my brain understanding that this is a safe environment? And creating that is really difficult. This pillar emphasizes that you have to identify what creates both types of safety and making sure you're doing these types of things. And one of the challenges you run into with this is you'll have competing interests. We have clients who tell me, I feel safest if I'm able to carry a knife. And I have a whole slew of other clients who I can't have them in a room with someone with a knife because that makes them feel unsafe. So how do I make someone feel safe, knowing that what makes them feel safe is having a knife, knowing that it makes everyone else in the room feel unsafe? How do you do that, right? And this is what this pillar is about, is navigating those things, identifying where's that medium. Okay, you need this knife to help you feel safe when you're out going through the streets. Can we do a safety storage box, and when you come in, you can drop off the knife, and when you leave, you can check it out? Is this an intermediary that works for you? So when we're thinking about safety, really the questions we have to ask are things like, what policies protect people when they're being vulnerable? Do you have a policy in place that when someone's in your room or in your office and you're meeting with them and they're bearing out their soul to you about how they became homeless and how traumatic it was and how terrible the experience was, do you have something that stops people from just opening your door and asking you for a pen? Because I had to put up a little sign that said, when doors close, go away. Because people just kept walking in my office, and I would have clients and staff like bearing their souls out, crying in front of me, and someone would just walk in asking for something superfluous, something useless, right? And I'm just like, not a good use of our environment. What policies require someone to surrender their safety? Does the physical space appear safe? Can you see what's going on in the room, or do you have corners and hallways and stuff that you can't see through that make it difficult to navigate? When I walk into the building, can I actually tell where to go or not? Am I able to take actions that make me feel safer? And are there people who feel safe here, and are there people who don't feel safe, and what are the differences between these populations? So the next one is peer support. Everyone's heard of peer support? If you haven't, peer support, it generates a space where the service population is able to see the successful effects of the organization. The people who have the same lived experiences as the people receiving services are part of the organization. So I'll say for CAS, we don't hire people who, or we don't have a peer support certification, we don't have peer support staff because of some issues that come up when you have dedicated peer support. And some organizations navigate these issues no problem and some don't. But there are other ways to embed lived experiences. You can hire staff to do non-peer support roles that have lived experiences, which virtually every organization that works in homelessness has, as far as I'm aware. You can have things like lived experiences councils, where people who have lived experience are working directly with your organization to advise on new policy. You can talk to your clients about new programs and policies and ask questions about, does this work or does it not work? What changes would you like to see? What's really important is that me, as someone who's never experienced homelessness, cannot possibly fully understand what that experience feels like and what is needed to make someone feel safe or comfortable in a homeless shelter. So if I'm making all the decisions for our homeless shelter, I'm gonna make bad decisions, and trust me, I have. So the use of peer support and the incorporation of lived experiences is really central to this because it allows you to ensure that the people who are utilizing your services have a voice in what those services look like so that they can be represented and they can really get the help that they need. The next is collaboration and mutuality. So how many of us have sat in an office with a client and told the client, this is what I need you to do. Go do this, or you can't stay here. Or go do this, or I can't help you. This is the goal that I need you to work on.
Or you can't help them?
Yeah. Many of us have, and what this does is it actually really just takes the choice away from the client. And oftentimes, I'll say this, like oftentimes we know what's best for the client. We know what the client needs to do to navigate this situation. But just because we know what's best from a technical perspective does not mean that's what's best for the client in that moment. And this pillar is all about recognizing that and going, sometimes what we think is best, what we know is the right move to get through the system is not actually what the client needs. I've had clients who sit down in front of me and go, I don't really care about housing. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't care about housing? He's like, well, I actually really want to get a car. Probably not the right move, but okay, dude. And you have to go, okay, and help them get that car because maybe that is what the client feels safest with, right? And the process of collaboration and mutuality is going, okay, let's talk about why you feel like a car is the right move. And if that is really the direction you want to go, this is how I can help you get there. But also, housing is pretty important. And what would you like to do to work towards that if you needed to? It's not about telling the clients what to do, but it's about working with them towards the goal and working with them to decide what that goal is. And this is one of the hardest things. I mean, for a homeless provider, right? For a homeless shelter, I have to tell my clients, like, if you're not working towards housing, you can't be here because in Maricopa County, there are 1,000 people sleeping on the street directly outside of my shelter. If you're not working on housing and you're just hanging out here, or you're not doing something towards getting out of this shelter, I have 1,000 people that need a bed, and if you're not doing that, right? So how can you collaborate with the client to move them in a way that you need as an organization, but is also in a way that the client needs to resolve their homelessness in a way that they want to? Because this is important. If I sit down in an office and someone tells me you need to do X, Y, Z, or I can't help you, if I'm someone in distress, I don't know, okay, fine, you can't help me, I'll get out. And we're not fixing anything, right? We're not solving homelessness. Next is cultural, historical, and gendered issues. So at the beginning, I talked about my friend who did a bunch of BMX and motocross, got into a coma, came out, and the first thing he wanted to do was do more motocross. Everyone's backgrounds are different, and so just because something seems like it works for some people, doesn't mean it's gonna work for other people. how people feel safe, how people navigate these systems is all colored by their culture, by their history, by their gender, by their race, by all the identities that they bring with them. So, does your organization have cultural connections? Does your organization, does the work that you do, does the partnerships you build, do the people that you refer clients out to, do they consider cultural norms? Do they take these things into consideration? Can they? If you're thinking about something like the color of the floors, there's probably not a lot of cultural considerations to make. But one of the things I learned is that apparently senior clients really like arrows on the ground. It's like a whole thing. It's consistent feedback when you ask seniors, 65 plus, when you ask them what they want, they go, I would love if you had arrows on the ground telling me where to go. It's so, for me, it's like absurd, but apparently it helps them navigate the space. And so that is feedback we've gotten consistently for the Human Services campus in Phoenix, and now they're like literally painting arrows on the sidewalk outside to tell you, if you need to go to CAS, follow the green arrow, if you need to go to the LRC, follow the red arrow. Because that was the feedback they got. If you guys didn't know, I'm not 65, I would have never thought that. So you have to take into account the perspectives of people that aren't necessarily like you. Does your organization treat issues around race, gender, identity, equity, and accessibility as emergent? So I did this class with the leaders in my organization, and I asked them, how often do you get an email that goes, I need you to respond to this right now. I need you to handle this right now. This is an emergency. And they all raise their hand all the time. And I asked about it, and they go, most of the time, it's about funding. It's about money. This is present right now, you have to get it addressed because it's about money. And then I asked about the front doors to our shelter. And so the front doors of the shelter were these heavy, like 50-pound metal doors that had a button attached to them to open for wheelchair access. Except the button was so overused by all the clients that it did not work. And so if you were in a wheelchair and you were coming up to the building, you would go to pull this door and it was heavy as all heck. It was really difficult to open. I'm not in a wheelchair, I never thought about it, until one day I was walking through campus, and I saw a client almost fall out of their wheelchair trying to open the door. And so in the training, I asked them, why haven't we had a meeting about the front doors? And they go, what do you mean? They go, those doors are heavy. Most of our clients can't open it. And some of our clients are even almost injuring themselves trying to open it. Think about how our clients must feel. This is their first day homeless. They're going to the shelter everyone told them to go to. They go to open the door, and as they're trying to open the door, they almost fall out of their wheelchair. Think about how that must feel for that client. I'd never considered it. No one in that room had ever considered it. I asked, why did we remove the button? And they go, oh, well, the button was getting abused and broken, and we were having to repair it so often that it wasn't cost effective. Yeah, that was literally the answer we got. So I said, okay, why did we not have a meeting? If you can have meetings that you put together 15 minutes in advance to talk about a grant opportunity that came up, if you can have a meeting to talk about something the city asked for, if you can have a meeting about whatever, why couldn't you have a meeting about this button? Why did someone just decide, oh, we'll just remove it, it's not a big deal? Crickets. So in the middle of the training, we had a meeting about it, and we replaced the door with these 5-pound aluminum doors. Gender, or cultural, historical, and gendered issues are about this, are about thinking about all the various identities that we serve and how their experiences are fundamentally different than ours, and how traumatic it can be for someone if their identities and experiences aren't taken into consideration. So when we're thinking about trauma-informed care, we're asking ourselves these questions. Am I thinking about people who don't look or think like me? And the last one is empowerment. And so we talked about at the very beginning, trauma is really just powerlessness, right? It's this inability to act or control the outcome. It's an experience of powerlessness on the side of the ego. How are we empowering our clients to make decisions? If someone is experiencing trauma in real time in the form of homelessness, how are we giving them power to counteract that? And I promise you, you all do it every day. You do very small things that you're probably not even thinking about because it's just a habit you developed, but you do it every day. You walk in with someone and you ask them, how's your day going? And they get an opportunity to complain to you. And you're like, I shouldn't have started this person. But this is their opportunity to speak and say what they've been thinking that no one else has. When I first started the job I'm in now, I spent a month just going around talking to clients and learning about the problems they had so that I could think about this job in a different way. And I had a woman who goes, I've been here for 3.5 months and you were the first person who has stopped and asked me how my day is and has actually listened. And that felt empowering for her. When we're thinking about empowerment, we're thinking about things like, do you want this door opened or closed when you're in my office? Do you want to meet outside instead of in the office? Do you want to go to this provider instead of that provider? Do you want to get referred here instead of there? Small things, which we think are just a part of the procedure and the work that we do, are actually massive to our clients. Because many of them, when they're experiencing persistent trauma, will manifest something called vacant esteem. We've all heard of good self-esteem, and we've had bad self-esteem. And there's vacant esteem. And vacant esteem is not like, I have little value, no one cares about me. Vacant esteem is, I have no value. What happens to me doesn't matter. This isn't important. My life is not important. And I'm sure the vast majority of us have worked with a client who you ask them, what would you like to do? What's the next steps? What are you trying to do? And they go, I don't care. I've had clients who've had infections that if they don't go to the hospital, they're probably gonna die. And you say, you need to go to the hospital, you're gonna die. And they go, I'll die then. They just don't care. And this comes from persistent trauma. And the way you undo it is giving people choice, giving them power to make decisions. And it's hard. It is very hard to counteract. When we're thinking about trauma-informed care, we really have to think about how are we empowering our clients. And so what we're gonna do is talk about something called a capacity-based approach. We'll get there a little bit later. But when we're thinking about empowerment and choice, really we're thinking about capacity. What is the strength someone has and how can we tap into it? So, when we're applying trauma-informed care, we talked about all these principles. Really, there's two things I want you guys to think about. The first is recognizing trauma, and the second is staying regulated. And recognizing trauma is exactly that. Could this behavior that I'm seeing be a response to trauma? Could this behavior that this client is engaging in be there because they are responding to trauma in some form? And then, staying regulated. Am I regulating myself as I'm responding to this situation? Whenever you're interacting with a client, you should ask yourself, is this response an appropriate and reasonable response given the present conditions? I said in the beginning, I'm a linguist, and in linguistics, there's these things called maxims of language. And there's these basic rules that say if a person is a reasonable and logical thinker, and they are communicating according to all rules of language, there are certain things they just shouldn't do. They should answer things directly. They shouldn't use things like idioms or metaphors, and they should be very clear. And if they're not doing that, either this person is not reasonable, or they're trying to imply something, right? So if you ask someone, how was the movie? And they say, oh, the popcorn was great. There's two options, right? Either that person is not a reasonable person, they're crazy, and they think when you asked about the movie, you were really asked about the popcorn. Or the movie was so bad that the only redeemable part of the experience was the popcorn, right? And if you asked me how was the movie, and I said, well, the popcorn is great, you would assume the movie sucked, right? When we're thinking about trauma, we're thinking about the same thing. Is this behavior reasonable for someone? Or is this a response to trauma? Because in any given situation, if someone is a reasonable and well thought out person, they should behave a certain way. If a paint can dropped from the ceiling out of nowhere and I jumped out of the way, no one would go, what is Richard doing? You would all probably have jumped too. But if the paint can dropped and I just didn't respond, you probably think this guy's crazy, he's a psycho. Nothing gets to him. And more likely than not, I I'm not crazy, and maybe I'm noticed the paint can hours ago because I'm totally on edge all the time, right? Do their behaviors make sense? Anger in response to bad news is understandable, but is shouting and screaming? If you tell a client, well, actually, I forgot to submit this paperwork, and so you're not gonna get your voucher, and they get upset with you, that's reasonable. Probably getting really angry would be reasonable. But if they start throwing stuff at you, if they start getting belligerently angry, is that reasonable? Or is it more likely that there's an underlying trauma that has conditioned them to act in extreme ways? Being soft-spoken or shy is understandable, but is only ever giving one-word answers. If you have a client who sits in front of you and all they ever say is, yup, okay, sure, yeah, of course. Is this reasonable, or is there something else going on that's making them more likely to not want to engage with you? Being able to think about these things in this context is really important because it allows you, as I was saying earlier, to rethink how you're approaching the work. If someone is that shy and doesn't want to talk, but when you go into the day rooms and you see them interacting with their clients, they're laughing and shouting and doing all this stuff, you see them out in the street, you see them outside of your facility, and they're kind and personable and friendly, but they're stoic and quiet, and when they're meeting with you, there's something actually happening there, right? So being able to recognize trauma is really important. And the skill that we really want people to have is being able to recognize in real time when behavior is outside of the norm. And the easiest way to do that is to simply ask yourself, would this be reasonable? All other things equal.
A lot of the guys that come to the facility when I was doing intakes, it was more of a, let's just get this done, but gotta get in, you know? I don't know if that would, if we would look at that a certain kind of way.
I think impatience when you're going through bureaucracy is
Okay.
completely reasonable.
Right.
But if they're dealing with it in a way that is incongruent with actually getting answers, if they're skipping over what the stuff that would help them, and they're not really trying to get help, right?
Right.
Is that a reasonable response? And if not, maybe they're fatigued from doing an intake,
Right.
both internally with a bunch of different programs within the organization, but then externally with all the other providers that are in South Tucson and Piedmont at large, right?
Right.
And so these are the things to think about, right? And it changes how you, oh, I know, this is a lot of information, I know you get asked this all the time, let's just get through it and then we'll be able to get you a meal. Dinner's being served in an hour, right? And small things like that seem really insignificant, and again, you all probably do them all the time.
Right.
But they make a difference in how you're approaching this work. The other one is staying regulated. So humans have actually dedicated neurological pathways in our brains called mirror neurons. And what these do is they pick up on the stuff going on in people around us, and they replicate these sensory signals. And what this is meant to do is to give us things like empathy and really be able to understand the people around us. It helps produce social interactions. And we can see in animals that are not social creatures that they don't have these pathways. And so really this is a survival mechanism. It allows us to operate cohesively as social creatures. So when one prairie dog sees danger and gets dysregulated and starts freaking out because there is a predator on the horizon, all the other prairie dogs also start freaking out. One dog in the backyard of your neighborhood starts barking, and your dog in your backyard starts barking, and then the dog across the street starts barking, and then in 5 minutes, every dog in the neighborhood is barking, and I'm like, please shut up. Right? And this is a way of survival. So when someone is sitting in front of you, and we talked about this earlier, right? Someone's sitting in front of you and they become dysregulated, you start to feel dysregulated because there are pathways in your brain going, this guy is not doing too hot. Maybe we should be freaking out too. Maybe something's not right here. And it starts panicking. But it works in the reverse too. If someone's becoming dysregulated and you stay regulated and calm and collected, their brain goes, I'm freaking out, but this guy's fine. So actually, maybe everything is okay.
And that's really important to know.
Absolutely. Because I guarantee in your men's shelter, you guys see all the time, one guy gets upset, and then two guys gets upset, and and then 5 guys get upset, and then you've got a whole bunch of people shouting and screaming and getting angry over something they don't even know what they're mad about.
Or when you're cooking in a kitchen and you don't know if chicken's cooked, all you gotta do is put that one thing and put it in there and it breathes, you're good. So staying regulated, you know, there's always the pros and the cons, but if you've got the resources, you can actually get it done.
Absolutely. Operating in a trauma-informed manner means staying regulated, even in high-stress situations. And this is not easy, but it's important. Being able to go, I'm okay, and tap into these skills that we talked about earlier, helps your clients tap into them as well. And so we've all heard, if someone's shouting at you, you know, you just talk to them in a calm and collected voice. And you're like, that's nonsense. But it's not. There's science behind it, actually. It actually works. And for some people, it won't. And that's what's important, is learning these different tactics that work. I had a client that all the time I would have to take him on a walk, because if I sat still with him at any point, he would gradually become more and more dysregulated. But if we were walking and I was staying calm and he was walking, he was so distracted with walking that he couldn't become dysregulated because he was having a conversation with me and walking and doing all this stuff. You staying regulated, you staying calm, you staying in control of the situation allows your clients to actually neurologically mimic this behavior and re-regulate themselves. So are you modeling behavior you want to see for your client? Is there a change you can offer yourself to keep yourself regulated? A lot of times we try to do things for our clients, but what are we doing for ourselves? Is it really hot in the room? And you know what? I'm getting really hot, so I'm gonna turn on the AC. I'm not gonna ask if the client wants the AC on, because if it helps me stay regulated, maybe it'll keep the client regulated as well. And would expressing any tactics help regulate both you and the client? Can you just ask the client, hey, do you wanna go for a walk real quick? Do you wanna go get a coffee? Do you wanna go get some water? Will that help regulate you, but also regulate the client? And if so, just do it. So, I told you guys at the beginning, this is all evidence-based. That's because there's a bunch of research that people have done on trauma-informed care. And so, this is how we know it works. When a bunch of nurses were trained on the use of trauma-informed care, they actually found that they reduced the drug use among women in co-occurring disorder clinics. So women were going to this clinic to get help for mental health disorders and drug use disorders, and when the staff were more trauma-informed, repeat drug use actually decreased. This is because the staff were more trauma-informed and were treating the clients better, and so when the clients were leaving, they weren't immediately leaving and going to get drugs to regulate themselves, because the nurses had kept them regulated. Versus before the training, the nurses deregulated the clients because they weren't trained on trauma-informed care. So the clients were leaving and going to do drugs because that's what regulated them. They found that the reduced need for sedative hypnotic medications to control behaviors in mental health environments. So they actually saw 3 things. They took all the staff and they trained them on trauma-informed care, and they found that clients were becoming dysregulated less often, so they didn't need to use hypnotics or sedatives in order to calm the clients. When the clients became dysregulated, they didn't need to use sedatives to calm them down because they had these skills in trauma-informed care to not need to use sedatives and to re-regulate them other ways. And then they were also regulating each other. So the nurses would get hyped up because the client was getting hyped up. And then they would get angry and they would get frustrated and they would go, you know what, we just need to sedate him, there's no control on this behavior. And so once they were trained on trauma-informed care, if one of the nurses got deregulated, the other nurses were able to use the skills that we've just talked about to regulate that nurse. And then they didn't feel the need to use the sedatives as frequent. Just training on it and talking about, hey, this is how this stuff works, this is how you should be thinking about it, helps actually reduce the use of sedatives. And if you've ever worked in a mental health setting, using sedatives is really serious. It's really daunting and it feels really heavy. So being able to reduce the use of sedatives is a massive amount of impact. But they also found, and this is really what matters for us, job satisfaction went up. People were happier with their jobs because not only were the clients becoming dysregulated less frequently, but everyone around them was becoming dysregulated less frequently. If I'm being honest, 9 times out of 10, if I'm angry at work, it's because my staff have done something to piss me off, not the clients. We all have the coworker that we don't like, that coworker that just knows how to press your buttons, right? Trauma-informed care, getting trained on it, getting trained on understanding these things and being able to think through them and navigate through them helps improve job satisfaction. And we actually saw lower rates of staff turnover and higher rates of staff retention. People are happier in the work that they're doing when they're not getting pissed off all the time. Who would have thought? So, how much time do we have? We're gonna take 5 minutes in little groups to just talk about something in your work every day. And this is actually a great organization to do this with because you guys are all over the place. So ideally, not with someone in your department. I want you guys to talk through something that you see regularly in your work that you go, this either causes me or causes my client stress or feels re-traumatizing, and really, if I were to fix it, this is what I would do. And it can be as simple as, we ask all these questions 5 minutes after they arrive, or it can be as massive as, I can't even think of something huge. It can be as massive as, these are all the policies that we have. And before we get started, I would say this is not meant to get critique and complaining. This is meant to really think about critically the work that you're doing and how you can change what you're doing on a day-to-day to be more trauma-informed about how you're approaching it. So take 5 minutes. Does anyone want to share what they talked about in your group?
Confused about the thing that we talked. So in the sense of like, I guess I'm not trauma informed, as far as us or about how they are. Like I don't need,
Which did you talk about?
well, I don't know, 'cause it's kind of, being turned away at an emergency shelter, how would that be trauma informed?
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm trying to say, I don't understand that concept,
Yeah. So how would you fix it?
not turn them away,
Can you do that?
but that's not always an option.
Exactly.
Look, there'll be more resources.
Yeah, but that's not my job.
Yeah.
So what I can do is tell them, there's a 211, but in all aspects, I don't have the 411 on everybody's.
So, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the challenges of this work, right?
Right.
Is there will be times, in a perfect world, everyone will be trauma informed all the time. I would love that personally. But the reality is you can't. If you wanted to be trauma informed all the time and you simply not turn people away, you would need a 3,000 bed shelter for every single person that's experiencing homelessness in Pima County, right? That's just not feasible. And so one of the big things that I like to tell people about trauma informed is, the point is not necessarily to always be trauma informed. The point is to always take a trauma informed approach. Is to ask yourself, what is the trauma informed approach in this? What is the trauma informed thing to do? And is that feasible? And sometimes the answer is gonna be no. That's just the truth. Sometimes it will be no. And if it's no, then you ask, okay, what are alternatives I can do? Like providing the 211 number. What are things that I can do to try, at least? But the answer will be, you can't always be trauma informed. You simply can't. And that's just the truth of the work, right? One of the big fights that I've gotten into at my organization has been around the bathrooms. I would love if our bathrooms had way more privacy than they currently do. But the reality of it is clients would use that space to do drugs, to do all sorts of things. And if I'm being honest with you guys, as controversial as it may be, I don't have a strong opinion about people doing drugs. But when the bathrooms had more privacy, we had an increase in overdoses in our facility. And that's something I can't have. And so we had to do things like lift the stalls so that you could see more of the floor. You obviously couldn't see who was in it, but you could see if there was people in it, and you could keep track of them easier. Stuff that, again, in a more trauma-informed setting would be the case, but you have to do to manage the area. And so when we're thinking about being trauma-informed, the question is not necessarily, what do I do? It's, can this be more trauma-informed? What are steps we could take? And if the answer is no, that's okay, as long as you're asking the question, because that means you're thinking that way.
I think that there is kind of a way, so I've been told a lot, I've been with the foundation since 21, that I'm very assertive. And I'm not assertive, I'm trying to be transparent with you, why, because I've been on that side of you.
Yeah.
So what you're doing and you're saying is not gonna get you anywhere, because you're definitely lacking something. And I can't tell you what it is, but now I'm standing on this side. So when
Mhm.
they were telling me, and I was on that side, doing like you did, they definitely, like, they disregarded it. Why? Because they said they saw what I was willing to put towards the plate, so I wasn't willing to lose the 50, so they backed up.
Mhm.
I think that if trauma informed coming to the facility, if Primo that I had maybe a whole clock from 12 to 12, and you went through the steps, so let's say a year,
Mhm.
we start you here, and if you really are, this is where you'll end up in. But we don't have that. So you go to the shelter, you have 90 days, and I get it, it's good, but we have to make them leave.
Mhm.
So we've set them up, they're stable, they're good, but we don't have any more time.
So,
So trauma informed coming in, that's your go-to.
mhm.
You don't have more than 90 days. This is what we can offer you, and this is what's gonna happen. If it's feasible for you or not, let's just do it,
Yeah.
and then you'll find out tomorrow. But this is what it's gonna be. See, when they come into our facility, they're everywhere, or they're not. And then when they come in, they're everywhere, or they're not, because of the system. And because if we do it, like it says, one-on-one, but if we don't have a uniform program, then not everybody gets the same opportunities. And that means if you already have a plan for housing, then get rid of the housing. If you don't need, rehabilitation, then get that out of the way.
Yeah.
But those 90 days are spent of us seeing who's gonna stay in, who's a medical, who needs a job, who's going to PV Works, who's gonna get to OPCS. I don't think trauma informed is anywhere involved.
So I think a big part of that is thinking about those things, right? It's
Right.
how do we, cause it sounds like what you're saying is really more structure, and so it's how do we
Correct.
incorporate more structure into a program that in many ways needs to lack that structure in order to get people into the door.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges.
And I'm taking the trauma informed care more as, each one-on-one. It's, or not instant, but every one-on-one contact you have during your day of work, you could be with the participants or with coworkers. You're doing trauma informed care, it's one-on-one, not so much, it's more one-on-one.
It's very much, sort of as I said in the beginning, right, it's a philosophy, it's a way of thinking about the work we're doing, and it's a lens to approach it through. And it's really, how am I doing this work, incorporating this understanding of trauma that we talked about in the first half of this class into these interactions, right? So it certainly is one-on-one. I think there are circumstances where it can work at a larger scale as well. But it definitely has its role in one-on-one interactions, yes. So the last section we're gonna talk about is really about, okay, what's a tangible skill that you can walk away from with this class?
Nice.
And so,
Sorry.
being nice is certainly one of them. But the first thing we have to do is really just accept this truth, right? And the truth is that this work means that working with vulnerable, traumatized, and sometimes volatile populations. The most important thing that we can do for our staff is then to understand that our clients are actively trying to navigate this traumatizing system. There are parts of this work that it does not matter what changes we make, how we go about it, how we think about it, it will just be traumatizing because homelessness is traumatizing. And that many of the things that, or many of the clients are doing things that they have learned that keep them safe and make them feel better about what they're experiencing, even if that is contrary to what seems like accepted behavior. I love telling this story. I had a client come up to us inside the shelter once who was trans, and they did not want to use the women's side of the shelter, and they had to use the bathroom. They wanted to use the men's side of the shelter. But we had just had an issue with them behaving inappropriately on the men's side of the shelter, and so we were trying to navigate this. And they just kept saying, I need to use the bathroom, just let me go over there to use the bathroom. And they were arguing with the staff member for about 5 minutes until they walked 10 steps over, stood in front of a trash can, dropped their pants, and peed directly in the trash can in this big lobby full of probably 20 or 30 people. And my staff was talking to me afterwards, and he goes, I just do not understand why they would do that. And I go, think about how badly you've had to pee in your life. And think about if you were in a situation where you just had to pee and people weren't letting you, and the people that weren't letting you were also the people that were yelling at you yesterday, the people that were treating you like your identity wasn't important yesterday, the people that were disrespecting you yesterday, and you just have to pee. You're gonna just pee eventually. You're not gonna sit there and argue with these people. They didn't give you respect, so why are you gonna give them respect and you're just gonna pee? And the staff member went, I would never pee in front of other people. I go, you don't know what you would do. Because you don't, until you're in these situations, right? The reality of this work is that sometimes clients are gonna do things that we cannot make sense of, that we cannot understand, that we cannot ever picture ourselves doing, but they will do it because they're existing in a state of persistent trauma. And it is so hard for any of us to rationalize these behaviors if we are not also experiencing it, if we haven't been in that place. Trauma-informed care means ensuring that everyone is working with our clients to be able to recognize these behaviors and see them as protected. To be able to understand that clients will do things that may feel wrong, but more often than not, they're doing these things because it makes them feel safe, and that we need to be able to engage with them in a way that facilitates their feeling of safety, but also facilitates the larger work that we're trying to do. Oftentimes, the perception of danger from our clients is catalyzed by re-traumatization and fear, and rather than punishing our clients to protect ourselves, we can mitigate risk by creating safer and more trauma-informed environments. And the easiest way to do this is, as we talked about earlier, a capacity-based approach. So a capacity-based approach is saying that within us, we all have strength. Every single one of us has strength. We have to, that's how we navigate this world around us. But oftentimes, the things that we view as strengths aren't recognized by everyone else's strengths. And the things that we do to protect ourselves are seen as inappropriate, unacceptable, or bad, and so we don't want to recognize them as strengths. But even in bad behavior, there is an underlying strength. And so imagine you are at the men's shelter, and you're talking to one client, and another client comes up to you and starts talking to you over the person that you're talking to. And you say, hey, just give me a minute. And you continue talking to the person you're talking to, and then they start getting more and more agitated, and they start yelling. And then the person in front of you turns around and punches them in the face. And you go, you can't do that, dude. Because they can't. You can't have clients punching each other. Within that, there was obviously this bad behavior of enacting violence on another client, but there was a strength in it. And the strength that was in that decision was that that client felt like they weren't getting the attention they needed. They felt like someone was disrespecting them. They felt like they were in distress. And when they had those feelings, they made a decision and they acted on it. The action they decided, not a strength, not good. The ability to make a decision to advocate for yourself is a strength. Many of us are not very good at advocating for ourselves. Advocating for yourself is actually very difficult. And many of us do it in ways that are indirect, like punching someone who's disrespecting you. The capacity-based approach says, punching, bad, advocating for yourself, good. It says, okay, you pull that client aside and you go, hey, you can't punch people. But how did you know that you needed to punch him? He goes, well, my face started to get really hot. I started to get really angry. I wasn't feeling too good. And my whole body felt tense and I just needed to let out the tension, and he was the one that was pissing me off, so I had to do it. That is strength. We talked about 3 skills earlier that he used: sensations, awareness, readiness to confront. And he was ready to confront because he threw this, right? Those are all strengths. And that client, without really recognizing it, implemented all 3 of them and used them in real time. A capacity-based approach says, okay, step aside, that's great, I'm glad you could recognize those things in you. Next time, I can't have you punch someone, so when you're feeling that way, all you need to go is, I'll come back to you later, and let's go outside and sit on the patio and have a smoke. And then you come back to me in 10 minutes and tell me how you're feeling. And he goes, okay. And we're gonna pretend that the client wouldn't get exited for punching someone else. The next time, that client is coming up and talking to you and the same thing happens. And this time, the same thing happens, they get really angry, they feel all the tension, and they say, oh, he told me to go out. And he goes out and he sits on the patio, and someone sits right down next to him and starts talking to him, and he punches them in the face. But something happened there, right? The first time they got upset, they did the right thing, they walked away, they applied the strengths that we talked about the first time.
And that person had to sit next to you.
And so, the third time comes around and you go, look man, you can't keep punching people. You have the same conversation, you go, okay, next time when you go on the patio, I want you to have a smoke, but I want you to just take a few steps off. If someone comes near you, just go, hey, I'm sitting out here by myself right now. And it happens again. They go out and sit on the patio and they apply that skill. And this time, they don't punch anyone. And you have a win. And they come back to you 15 minutes later, they've calmed down, and you continue the conversation that you were having. A capacity-based approach says we all have strength in us. We all have the capacity to manage these negative emotions, but most of us do not know that that capacity is there or how to apply it. And our job as staff, working with each other and with clients, is to recognize that strength in everyone around us. And this is easy to do because you don't have to think about trauma-informed, you don't have to think about really anything. You just have to be able to deconstruct behaviors around you. When you see someone getting agitated, you go, hey, what's going on? And give them that opportunity to talk to you. And when they're communicating to you your feelings, you go, that's great, I'm glad you're able to tell me that. How can I make you feel better? How can we help this? How can we de-escalate this situation? And tapping into that strength. When well-established, capacity-based approach can be taught to anyone, anytime, over anything. You don't have to have someone's whole history. You don't have to have an in-depth understanding of them. It converts an adversarial dynamic, which is you versus the person, into a collaborative one, which was one of our pillars, right? It turns it into, you've got strength in you. How can we utilize the strength that you have to resolve this problem? And it turns something that goes from, I'm getting dysregulated because you're getting dysregulated, into, we're gonna regulate this together because what's happening right now is not kosher. And ultimately the goal is to get there before they punch someone in the face, right? But the goal is,
What if you like to punch people in the face and they punch someone in the face? What do you do when you
you tap into these same skills, you recognize the strength that you have in yourself, right? Capacity-based approaches are all about identifying where your strengths lie and utilizing them, identifying where other people's strengths lie and utilizing them. I do this with my staff all the time. I have one staff member who thinks he is the smartest person on the planet, and I will tell you, he is incredibly smart. He gets this work, he understands the resources, he understands more about this system than probably anyone I've ever worked with. But he can be a little egotistical at times, and if you correct him on anything, there's a lot of pushback, because how could it possibly be wrong? And so a lot of times when I'm approaching him, it's acknowledging, like, dude, you get this, you are smart, and relying on his intelligence to address deficits in other places, because that is his strength. His strength is how incredibly intelligent he is. And so when we're thinking about this work, we're thinking about everyone around us and the strengths that they have, because every single one of us has some strength in us. Every single one of us have skills that we use to navigate this world, and utilizing those strengths improves outcomes. So, in our last, technically we have a minute, but you guys don't mind if I go over a little, right? In the last, just a little bit, everyone likes talking about these crazy things clients did. So I just wanna open the floor to anyone to share a story of a time someone did something and you were just like, what is going on? Why would you behave this way? And then we collectively are gonna talk through, where was the strength? Where were the things the clients did in that moment that was strength-based? So would anyone like to start?
Ricky. Oh, okay. I had a client, I was working in a behavioral health setting. I had a client who's like 6'4", 6'5", I'm 4'11", and we're talking real nice, and then he says he wanted to beat my ass. Out of nowhere, he said he wanted to beat my ass, and I was like, okay, well, let's go ahead and do that outside. I opened the door and shut it, right when he went outside. There were strengths on both parts, him telling me that he wanted to beat my ass, and me not freaking out, opening that door, walking him outside, and shutting that door behind me. Fast story, but good story.
So 2 skills in there, right? The first was awareness. He was aware he wanted to beat you, but right? Oh, my computer's about to die. And your readiness to confront. I'm sure you were stressed in that moment, and you thought, what do I need to do in order to navigate this? And you did something, right?
And then I had him read me his poems outside the door, which diffused the situation, and he was able to trust me.
There you go. Anyone else?
Beat that story.
So I had a client who, another hoarder, I worked with a couple of hoarders, who was incredibly polite. She would come up to me all the time and she'd go, Mr. Richard, how are you doing today? And we'd sit down in my office and probably spend the first 15 or 20 minutes talking about me. And she would ask me all these questions. She asked me how my girlfriend was doing, how my life was going, how school was going, and all these things. And she was really polite, but she had a very extensive history. And when she would get upset, she would get like violently upset. Like she would start shaking and screaming, and she would start throwing things. And it was just like this catastrophe. She would break down. And I remember I was meeting with her one time, and I'm sitting in my office, and she's asking me if she could keep this ring that she found. And she's telling, oh, it's so pretty, it's nice, I love it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you can't keep it. You can't have this. You found it, it could belong to another client, and this is just a policy that we have because we've had a history of someone finding something, they say it's theirs, it's actually another client's, and they get into a whole thing about it. And I spent probably 4 or 5 hours arguing back and forth with her about this ring. And just trying to convince her, like, you can't keep this. And at some point she gave it to me to look at, and so that I had it in my possession. I was like, I can't give this back to you. And it was like one of those little rings you get in a plastic bubble at the mall. Like it was literally worth 50 cents. And so I was like, girl, I will take you to the mall and just buy you one. Like, the world. And we argued back and forth about it for hours. And she, at one point, she threw a stapler at me. She like screamed and shouted all these things. She got really, really angry. And I was just like, where is this nice lady that was talking to me earlier? And eventually she leaves and gives up on the ring. But I think it was about 2 months later, I learned in talking to her that her and her husband had gotten divorced, and the reason she was homeless was he just kicked her out, and she had nowhere to go. And when he kicked her out, he did not let her bring any of her stuff. He changed the locks, and she had lost all her belongings. And then it sort of clicked for me. The ring that I thought had no value, she saw as a lot of value because she had just lost everything in her possession, and she had just reclaimed this ring, and now I was taking it from her. And I look back on that moment, and I thought back to the conversation I had, and throughout that conversation, she had done so many things that had indicated strength to me. She had expressed to me how upset she was. She expressed to me how important the ring was, even though I didn't see any value in it. She told me, you know, this ring, it makes me feel so beautiful when I'm wearing it. And she did all these things to advocate for herself. And this was capacity. And so I reconvened with her after I learned this, and I talked her through, and I was like, I really just wanted to revisit this conversation that we had because I wanted to apologize because I didn't take the time to ask like why this was so important to you. And so we were talking through it, and then I go, well, one of the things I really want to say is throughout the whole conversation, you you got really upset, but you were communicating with me. And so the next time you're upset with me, just tell me, like, I'm angry about this and I have a reason, but I can't find the words for it. And she never threw anything at me again. No staplers, no chalk, no boards, nothing. Because anytime she started to get upset, she'd go, I don't have the words, I need to get out of here. And she would storm out of the room and we would reconvene 15 minutes later. And it dramatically altered the course of my relationship with her because I was able to interact with her better. There were times when she would tell me she didn't know the words and I would go, okay, let me help you find them. Let's talk through this and see if we can find the words. And we relied on that strength of her ability to know, I'm angry, you're not listening, I have something to say, but I don't know what to say. And relying on that strength to build communication between her and I. So when we're talking about identifying capacity, that's really what we're talking about, is where are these strengths that are embedded in the way that our clients are communicating with us? Where are the strengths that are embedded in the way our staff are communicating with us? And how can we rely on these strengths to improve the relationships that we have and keep these conversations right there? Anything else? Any final thoughts? So, this is the end. The big things to take away from this is that there's no right way to do trauma-informed care. Every client will have slightly different needs and experiences, but slightly different desires, goals, strengths, and weaknesses. You don't have to know what someone's trauma is to be trauma-informed. A capacity-based approach does not require any history. It requires listening to your clients and thinking about them from a perspective of strength and not from weakness. Trauma takes many forms, and just because something doesn't seem traumatizing to you does not mean it is not traumatizing to someone else. I have people tell me all the time, oh, well, my mom used to spank me all the time and I don't have any mommy issues. And I'm like, are you sure? And even if you don't, that doesn't mean other people won't. Everyone has capacity, we just have to activate it. And the goal of trauma-informed care is not to fix people, it's to create a space where they become regulated and exit crisis. We will not fix anyone's trauma in the place that we work. It's just not our responsibility, right? Our goal is to create a space where people can begin that process of healing, where they feel safe, where they feel seen, and where they find strength in them, so that they can heal down the road once they've stabilized. And that's it.